thinking about potentially future promises, what would you plan to do in a second term that you haven't been able to do in your first term?
Well, to some extent, it is more of some of the good things that we've been able to do so far. We have, for example, made tremendous progress, and I can give you numbers on this, when it comes to mass incarceration, when it comes to mass supervision, meaning excessive probation and parole. We've had great success in setting up a unit that is there to make sure we protect immigrants, whether they are victims, witnesses, or defendants. It's made good progress. We set up a unit that is for the purpose of protecting workers who have crimes committed against them, sometimes by their employers. These are new programs. They take more time. We've done great work, I think, with our conviction integrity unit, but that work doesn't end. We have a queue of 800 plus cases that need to be reviewed carefully. So we need to do all of that. Obviously, one of the things that we will face in the second term is the tremendous challenge we have now with gun violence. I could actually talk about that all night too, but I can tell you it is a top priority of ours in many ways. We have a press conference every Monday in which that's the first thing we talk about. And then we talk about other works and other efforts in the community. Among other things, I would like to see the successes we've been able to have so far, and even the failures that we've had so far. I would like to see them advanced in a second term. I would also like to see a process of genuinely addressing prevention of gun violence, shootings, but also gun homicides in the city. We are in a pandemic moment that has affected it. But even after the pandemic, we have to do the right thing coming out of this, or we will remain a city that has chronically high levels of violence, while at the same time having an outsized police department in relation to the size of the city. We're the 6th largest city with the 4th largest police department. So those are things I'd love to talk with you about with you in more detail. And I'm guessing there might just be a question on that.
Yes, we will definitely have some follow-up questions, particularly about what you've shared just now related to gun violence, and also in your written questionnaires. That is certainly an area of focus for us as a ward that we've been thinking about and discussing, and as I'm sure lots of people have across the city. Before we get to that, our next question is, we wanted to ask, what endorsements are you seeking or have you received?
Well, let me see. I am not seeking the endorsement of the leadership of the Fraternal Order of Police. I was, in fact, the only candidate last time to say I would not accept it if this particular leadership were to endorse. That's not to say I would never accept endorsement from a police organization. I was endorsed by the Guardian Civic League, which is the African American Officers Association, last time. But it is to say that this leadership has shown its hand and shown what it stands for. And I will not be drinking in their bar at their headquarters with the Proud Boys. That's just not going to happen. So no to that. We have, it's kind of early in the cycle. Let me see. We got endorsed by Elizabeth Warren. How's that? We got endorsed by, I don't know if you get endorsed by John Legend. I think he just sings songs for you if that happened. We expect, let me try this, because I don't actually think we've had that many endorsements yet, but we expect to have, I'm sorry.
We have all 3 AFSCME locals. We have the laborers. We have neighborhood networks. We have Real Justice PAC, and we have Pennsylvania Working Families Party.
Well, the good news is that one of us knows the campaign. That is Brandon Evans, my campaign manager. And I'm happy to hear all of that. So we have those endorsements, but we do expect to have broad labor support with the majority of the unions as we had before. We certainly expect that a lot of the Democratic organizations that thought our promises were good ones are going to endorse us because we've kept so many of them.
Great. Thank you. And thank you both. Thank you, Brandon, as well.
Mm-hmm. We also have the first ward and reclaim, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Great. Thank you. All right. Well, that's very informative. Our next question is a little bit different. What is your approach to mitigating harm to victims of crime?
So we have done a few things that I think are kind of remarkable, and it's sad to talk about right now because one of the people most responsible just suffered the loss of her second son to gun violence over the last week. But one of the things that we have done is initiated what is known as the CARES program, C-A-R-E-S. This is a grant-funded program which provides specialized services to families that are dealing with a homicide. Survivors of that homicide get special handling for 45 days. The people who provide the handling are 12 people selected and trained who have in their own lives experienced homicide. That has turned out to be a very successful program. The grant funding has been redone again. We came in and we believed, and I do believe, that there were gaps in terms of our full communication with victims. So one of the things that we did is we came up with a way to make our attorneys and also our victim witness coordinators more accountable for their efforts to be in touch with and to have input from various survivors and victims. That was done in the form of coming up with essentially a spreadsheet. I suppose it's computerized at this point, but every effort at contacting a family in relation to a crime had to be documented. Did you do it by phone? What phone number? Did you do it by email? Did you do it by sending a letter? Did you send a detective with a letter over to that house since we didn't get contact? If you were not able to get any response based on the information we had, and often police do not collect very much contact information, did you use a LexisNexis database, which is how the statewide victims advocates would do these kinds of searches, real estate, credit? Did you do all these things to try to get in contact with them? Were your efforts repeated? Were they diligent? Were they thorough? So that is another thing that we have done, and I think we've had some good results with it. We've been very supportive of our victim witness coordinators who, are increasingly skilled. Our new head is a woman by the name of Keziah Cameron, who's been in the office 17 plus years and has been, I think, very capable about this. But, I must be candid with you. There has been a little bit of friction, at least in the press and at least among our detractors, about our dealings with victims and witnesses. And it comes from a very simple point. And the point is that we are in an office now that used to actually on the record claim that they represented victims. Well, the law is quite clear that you do not. When you stand up and say, I am for the people, or I'm for the Commonwealth, Larry Krasner, Your Honor, for the Commonwealth, there's a reason you say that. And it's different than what a defense attorney says. A defense attorney says, I'm here for John Smith, who's the defendant. The reason is that our oath is to seek justice for everyone in Philadelphia. And that means the victim. It means the survivor. But it means witnesses. It means people who have no involvement in the case whatsoever, but who may be affected if we burn up all the city's money.
Sorry, Mr. Krasner, that's your time.
Oh, okay.
If you want to go ahead and finish that thought before we move on. Thank you, Julia.
Sure. Thank you, Julia. So the point I'm getting at in my slow way is that we represent everyone. And to a very large extent, what has happened with victims historically in Philly is they have been used politically. It was easier to always make the survivor or the victim's family happy by doing whatever they wanted and even deceiving them as to what the case was really about and what it was really worth, because the media never attacked you. When you reserve the independence that the office requires, when you actually comply with your oath to seek justice for everyone, not just the people most affected by it in terms of their loss, then sometimes you're not doing exactly what it is that the victims or the survivors would have you do, whether it's the death penalty or whether it's some very long sentence for some of them, or whether it's the opposite. I've talked to victims and witnesses who don't want someone who viciously stabbed them prosecuted at all, right? Sometimes we just can't do what it is a victim or witness wants. And that, to me, is where the criticism comes from. This is one more aspect of culture change within the office.
Thank you. So switching gears a little bit to ask specifically just about some of the nuts and bolts of the campaign. Can you describe your campaign's plan to win the election with regards to staff, field operations, and fundraising?
Am I allowed to call my lifeline, Brandon Evans, who obviously knows more about the campaign than me? Is that permitted?
By all means.
Mr. Evans, are you with us? Or are you watching Mr. Vega at a different ward meeting so you can report back?
No, I'm still here.
Okay, Mr. Evans, we have been asked to lay out a little bit of roadmap for our plans in terms of the campaign.
What's the question?
We were interested in the campaign's plan to win the election with regards to field operations, staff, and fundraising. And I guess a follow-up question after that will be related is, who are the primary donors to your campaign?
We have a diverse group of donors nationally, locally. Some of the labor unions I've mentioned have already committed max checks. We have, of course, a lot of national friends who are interested in criminal justice who donate. So I think we have a diverse group of donors. So those are our primary donors. You know, a good mix of local and national people.
And I would add a good mix of low dollar and significantly higher dollar donations from both national and local sources in terms of the donors.
Great. And related to that, I think part of the question also is about field operations. Are you doing things like knocking doors at this point? You know, I know that's been a question for campaigns over the last year. What does the field strategy look like?
We will stand up, both a volunteer and a paid canvas.
I can tell you this: we did rather well with our signatures. I think we delivered about 9,200, and that was before another batch was set to come in. I don't know how Mr. Vega did, but that was effective, much like the last campaign was effective with Brandon leading it. I think that our signature effort was strong.
Great, thank you. Now, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and co-chair of the endorsements committee, Larry Lindsay, who has a few follow-up questions, and I have some as well if there's time.
Good evening, Mr. Krasner.
Go me, Larry.
I want to go back to your relationship with the police department a little bit. We're all extremely concerned about the rise of the level of domestic violence, domestic terrorism, and the rise. The FBI report you cited in your answers, your written answers, acknowledging that the police departments all over the country have been infiltrated by white supremacist organizations. First question is, do you see that as a significant problem in our police department? And what, if anything, can the DA's office do about that? Do you have confidence in the chief of police, and what's your relationship with her? And what steps do you think need to be taken, if any? What do you think would be effective in trying to minimize the impact of these organizations in our police department, if you think it's a serious issue?
Okay, great question. You know, I obviously terrorism doesn't take a lot of people to pull it off, and sometimes terrorists look frankly foolish until they succeed. So it is always a concern, especially when we're talking about a police department where a detective, a Philadelphia detective, was determined to have been involved in the insurrection activity, at least to have been present and somewhat involved at the Capitol. And she, for those of you who may not know, was involved in recruitment. Okay. So that person is trying to figure out who should be in this department or not. That's not a good thing. It is concerning when you find out that the Proud Boys are having drinks at FOP Hall and that John McNesby's denying it. And then the Proud Boys are putting up social media to show that that's exactly what they were doing at FOP Hall. Yes, that's concerning. Every bit of it is concerning. We have, I think, a good relationship with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And we all agree that white supremacist domestic terror is the #1 concern that we have. What I can tell you about the police commissioner is I believe I have a good relationship with her. I believe I had a good relationship with the last commissioner. The rough relationship I have is with the leadership of the FOP, not even the rank and file, in my opinion, many of whom represent, I would say, a much more modern approach to policing than the retired membership of the FOP, who, by the way, control it because most of the members of the FOP are retired. I don't think she wants any of that. You know, we are, after all, speaking of a Black woman. You know, I don't think in any way she believes that it's appropriate to harbor these kinds of white supremacist biases or to enable these kinds of organizations. It would be hard for me, though, to assess to what extent there's an effective effort internally to get at it within the police department. And it's also hard for me with such a large police department, it's 6,500 active officers, 7,500 active personnel. It's hard to know to what extent we are dealing with, an assortment of bigots, white supremacists, and racists, or we are dealing with people who are actually engaged with some of these organizations and are capable of doing great harm. That is a more difficult thing to look at. I think we know from the Plain View Project that there certainly are plenty of police officers, at least a few hundred, I think it was 300 and some, who are capable of using no privacy settings and saying things that are wildly racist, misogynist, anti-Muslim, etc. On the internet. And I do think there's no doubt that there, to some extent, there exists a culture within the Philadelphia police, like many other police departments, that is tolerant of extreme right thought. So we should be concerned about it. I am concerned about it. We may be able, as the investigation continues and what happened at the Capitol at the federal level, we may be able to give more insight into to what extent people within the department were involved. You may already know this, but Pennsylvania apparently has produced more people arrested for activity at the Capitol than any other state, which is, of course, shameful, but not that surprising for those of us who have followed the level of hate groups in the Commonwealth for a very long time.
To follow up on that question regarding your admirable efforts to identify and to isolate officers which have been determined to be corrupt or willing to perjure themselves in a trial. Do you think the do not call policy that you have for these officers, is that working to try to isolate them from the rest of the department, or is that is it working? And how is your relationship with the internal affairs unit over there?
Great question. So I do think it is working in a couple of different ways, but not perfectly, of course. It is very controversial. We've been sued over it. We basically have been dealing with that lawsuit continuously now for a couple of years. What we have is not actually a list, it's a database, and the database includes troubling information about officers. A subgroup of them have records of being such liars that we will not present them to testify. But there are many others on that list about whom the information is troubling, but and has to be turned over to the defense. But it's not, in our opinion, a basis for refusing them to call them as witnesses in all cases. And then there's also some information that's troubling, but really not troubling in the same kind of way. What am I talking about here? So if you are driving drunk in another county as an off-duty police officer, you're on vacation, you had too much, you get arrested there and they prosecute you there. That's information that we need to keep track of. You probably got diverted. You probably didn't get convicted like most first-time drunk drivers, but it does not necessarily mean you are a liar. It does not necessarily mean that we would not present you to testify. That's sort of at the not so serious end of this. On the other hand, somewhere in the middle, you have a person not to have been found to be a liar, but a person who posted something with the Plain View Project that said, kill all Muslims. Well, that's pretty troubling. When you have a defendant who has a Muslim name, that's pretty troubling. When you may have a case where there are witnesses who are wearing, Muslim garb, things of that sort. And all the way over on this side, the really troubling end, we have, for example, the police officers who were taken down to federal court and prosecuted for massive involvement in narcotics, corruption, lying in case after case, stealing money, etc. People who absolutely qualify for my "we will not put you on a witness stand" status. It is working in two ways. Number one, we have a constitutional obligation to turn almost all of that information over to the defense, and we do it. That's what there always should have been. It's part of my oath. Another way that it's working, and this is the less seen way, but I think it's very important, is that police officers make a lot of money going to court to testify. They often get quadruple overtime if they're doing it when they are not on shift. There are some officers who make probably as much money in overtime because they testify a whole lot as they make on their salary. The average police officer at certain years has made $10,000 off of that. Well, what happens when I stop giving you a subpoena? You lose money. And when you lose money and younger officers are looking up to you, you know, Mr. Senior Police Officer who's so clever and he's got a nice car, what happens when they look at you and they see you're not making the money anymore? It's a pretty good punch in the wallet. It's a pretty good punch in the culture of testifying and of stopping cars for whatever reason, then making up a reason later. It's pretty good. So I think it's positive. And I think in many ways, the use of a database that automatically will connect this information to a criminal case the moment that we receive electronically police information prevents a lot of mistakes. I know I didn't explain that very well, but basically there is a system in which we receive information on a case the cops want us to charge. We look at that, we make determinations about whether to charge it or not. But because we have an electronic database, even our charging decision is informed by what we know about those police officers. And when we do charge cases, and most of them will end up charging, all the information is in the file from the very beginning. So we don't have a situation where our assistant district attorneys don't have the info or they're pretending they didn't have the info because they're
Mr. Krasner, we're gonna have to leave it there. We have time for one more question.
Sure.
We have a question from the audience. It appears that relatively minor probation infractions can lead to overly harsh consequences, resulting in a revolving door between prison and probation that seemingly never ends for some offenders. Worse, probation officers have significant power, allowing them to exert ingrained racist beliefs. Do you support prison sentences without probation that allow the offender to get in and out with his or her life?
Short answer is yes, where it is appropriate. You should know that Philadelphia has been the most over-supervised city among the 10 largest cities. But I also need you to know this. We have reduced the over-supervision on probation and parole by 2/3 as compared to prior administrations, meaning pursuant to our policies, we call for much shorter periods of parole and probation when we call for them at all. 2/3 reduction. We have also reduced future incarceration by 50% as compared to the prior administration when we look at a metric of how many years of jail or prison and how many years of probation or parole are coming out of the Philadelphia courts consistent with our involvement and our policies in those courts. So we have made big changes there, and we've made big changes in other things like how many juveniles are being held in placements away from home. We have had an 80% reduction. We've gone from 600 plus going off to those snake pits like, Glen Mills, et cetera. We had an 80% reduction. We're now down to a little bit over 100 juveniles who are in those placements. I could go on and on. I realize the time is limited, but let me just come back.
One more question, unless you want to go ahead. You have something?
No, that's all right. You go.
Well, actually, no, we just have 3 minutes left. So I guess in our final couple minutes, is there anything else that you would like the second ward to know about your campaign or things that you'd like to expand upon?
Sure, there are a couple things I want to let you know. Number one, when I say we reduced future incarceration by half, I'm talking about future years of incarceration, right? You can't just count heads in jails and prisons and know what the future looks like. But if you look at the bill that's going to come due in terms of people in jail cells, it tells you something. So I've already told you about the supervision, the juvenile situation. Let me tell you another metric on juveniles. In one out of 2,400 approximately juvenile cases, 2 of the years of our administration, 2018 and 2019, only 6 of those juveniles 1 year had their cases resolved in adult court. Only 7 another year had their cases resolved in adult court. And these include the fact that there are on occasion homicides committed by juveniles, paralysis shootings, first-degree felony rapes. We kept our promise that we were going to try to treat juvenile court as juvenile court and keep juveniles where they should be, which is there to the extent possible. It's not possible in every case because unlike California and some other states, jurisdiction ends very abruptly at age 21. So you either got to deal with them up to age 21 or unlike California where they can have a level of accountability and supervision that goes on for decades, you're lost. Those are to me very major accomplishments, just like the existence of a robust conviction integrity unit, which has now exonerated 17 people on 18 cases, is an achievement. And it's an achievement that has to go on. Those are a lot of what we have been about. Now, I don't know if you have time to talk much about gun violence. We didn't get into it too deeply, but I can tell you that we have already initiated some things with the police commissioner that I think are very positive. But there is something that must be done in this city. And I know it's going to sound, maybe surprising to some of you, but this city is chronically weak on forensics. And we're dealing with a time when the relationship between police and the public is so bad that it's very hard for us to get witnesses to come forward at all in police shooting cases. So there's a price tag on this, but it's not that much. The price tag is about $5 million for the first year and about $2 million a year after that to bring some really cutting edge forensics.
Mr. Krasner, I'm sorry, we're going to have to leave it there. We are out of time, but thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
We have the campaign manager in the waiting room. Should we wait for the candidate himself?
Let's let him in case he has any updates, if the candidate's running late or anything like that.
Sure thing. Here we go. Mr. Trevor Maloney.
All right. I see we're joined by Trevor. Thank you for joining us. I think we're just waiting for Mr. Vega.
Yep, I'm about to send him the link now. We just got off another Zoom.
Great, thank you.
I'm here.
All right. Okay, we're going to get started now. I want to welcome everybody to tonight's Second Ward DA Candidates Forum. I am Colleen Puckett, Second Ward Leader. I want to start by thanking our endorsement committee co-chairs, Rhea Powell and Larry Lindsay, who organized tonight's meeting. We have an hour tonight. We are starting on time and ending on time. Our first candidate had a strict half hour. Our second candidate, Mr. Carlos Vega, will also have a strict half hour. We will end promptly at 8 p.m. As we know, the second ward is an open ward. That means that endorsements are determined by us, the elected committee people. Part of our responsibility as committee people also is to educate and engage voters. So accordingly, we are taping tonight's presentation and we'll be posting it on our social media channels. The questionnaire that Rhea and Larry sent to all of us today also will be posted on our website. 2 weeks from now, on March 24th, our ward will take a vote to endorse one of the two candidates we meet tonight. I'm going to turn it over now to Rhea Powell, Co-Chair Endorsements Committee, who will explain the ground rules for tonight's meeting. And again, I want to thank you, everybody, for coming tonight, and I want to welcome Mr. Carlos Vega. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colleen, and welcome Mr. Vega and Mr. Maloney. So my name is Rhea Powell. I'm joined by my co-chair of our endorsements committee, Larry Lindsay. And the way that we'll run the next, the remainder of our time is that we have several questions that we've planned, which will build on what we've learned from the written questionnaire that you provided to us. We estimate that each of these questions, we expect about a 2 to 3 minute response. We will be monitoring the time. One of our committee members, Julia Tackett, is very graciously monitoring the time. So you may occasionally hear from her if we need to move on to another question in the interest of time. We have some prepared questions that we plan to ask, and then we also will be monitoring the chat so that any committee people that would like to ask follow-up questions about anything that's discussed will have an opportunity to share those questions through Larry, Lindsay, or myself. So with that, we'll go ahead and just get started. And the first question is, just tell us about why you were running for district attorney.
Well, I'm running for district attorney because I always believed in public service. Growing up in New York, I'm first generation born in the United States. My family came from Puerto Rico. My family worked in a factory to bring my grandmother over, and my mother met my dad, and she had me and my older sister. When I was a little boy, I went through the trauma of a divorce, and my mother was remarried. She opened a grocery store in New York during the 70s. She worked from 6 a.m. to midnight, and I helped work in that store and took care of my younger siblings. During that period of time, there was a lot of violence in New York. Our office, my mother's store was robbed at gunpoint, knife point, and we were burglarized numerous times. Heroin was big during that time, and a lot of the guys I went to school with became addicted to drugs. A lot of them ended up in prison. A lot of them ended up dying. And a lot of them ended up committing crime because of lack of opportunity. And I was sensitive to that in that I knew these were good people. They were just like me, but they didn't have those opportunities. You know, there's unfairness. There's unfairness now. So I always thought I could bring about change and represent my people and being that voice by being a district attorney. So my whole educational career, I studied hard because I wanted to go to law school and become a lawyer. During my college years, my mother got a divorce and she opened a newsstand in the South Bronx in the subway because she couldn't run a store without my father. I had to help her because I was the oldest. I'm the male in the family. So I was up at 4 to open that stand with her, would stay with her till 8, go to school, and then at night work in a shoe store till 9 o'clock at night. Did that 7 days a week. So I believe in hard work. And then I was able to get good enough grades. I went to law school. In 1982, I came to Philadelphia. I was recorded by then the DA, Ed Rendell, and I remained there ever since. It took me 5 years, and then I got into the homicide unit. I'm the first Latino to enter the homicide unit. In fact, in the entire state, I was the only Latino homicide prosecutor. And for 30 years, I served in that unit. And in fact, till I left the DA's office in 2018, I was the only one. I'm a single dad. I have 3 children. 2 are living with me. I've had custody of my daughter since she was 5. She's 24. My son since he was 9. He's 17. So to put them through the type of schooling I went to, because I went to Catholic school, I was at a crossroads to whether leave the DA's office and make money or to get another means of paying their education. So I worked 15 years at UPS at night at Front and Oregon. So I did murder cases by day and worked loading and unloading trucks by night to educate my children. Why am I coming out of retirement? The reason being, I'm a Philadelphian, I'm a parent, and I'm a person of color. Many people have come up to me during the past year and a half, 2 years of asking me would I run because of the crisis we're having in this city. I mean, we need reform, but our children are dying in record numbers. I can't sit back and let this happen as a parent. My 2 children are the age and the color of the next victim. So having performed public service my whole career, I believe I had to step forward as a parent, as a public servant to say, I'm qualified based on my experience. I care both of victims and people who are swallowed up by injustice and drugs, that I could represent everyone fairly. So I bring in another aspect of a person who has lived through poverty, who has lived through violence, who has lived through injustice, because I have faced discrimination in the court system from police and from the office I served in. So I have seen that, and I believe we need to make a change. We need progress, but also we need to keep our community safe because in record numbers, children of color are dying. I'm talking about 80% of all murder victims are African-American, 12% are Latino. And this past year alone, 196 children were killed. And those are numbers that we can't accept. It's horrible. If you heard of troops dying overseas in those numbers, there would be something done about it. Something has to be done now.
Thank you. So you've shared a lot about your prior experiences that have, led to your decision now to run for DA. And you have many years of experience working in a DA's office. What would you do differently than the prior DAs, including those that you've worked for in the past, as well as the current DA?
Well, we need to engage the community because it's not an issue, and safety is very important. We also need to change the culture because there are many good people in our communities that commit crime. And I'm talking about those who commit nonviolent crime because they don't have the opportunities that other communities have. The poor school system, lack of education, lack of training, or lack of knowledge of what's available. So that's why I believe as a prosecutor, I need to keep my community safe from people who are causing violent crime. But also I need to protect those individuals who are swallowed up by the street, by lack of opportunity, by drug abuse. So I would make sure that we have the diversionary programs to address those issues of drug addiction, of mental health, of injustice. We have to do that. Secondly, we have to be transparent and represent the families of these victims or the victims themselves, that they are apprised of every step of the way. Also, we have to, in enforcing the law, have a measure of compassion with people who are being prosecuted, because we have to realize, being in homicide, the saddest thing I saw was there were two mothers suffering at the end of a case. There was a mother who lost her child forever through violence, and then another mother who was grieving because she lost her child through the court system. So really, both communities, both mothers are suffering, and we need to bring a change. And that's why I believe, and I had to stay within my lane because I can't change the school system. I'm the district attorney, but I wanted to put in an adopt a school program. What I would do is a DA would every other week have to adopt a school, be in that school between 8 to 4. That way they're a role model for those children. Be a person that the community would see, the mothers would talk to, feel safe with, and hopefully be engaged, that they would want to be part of that community. Also, I would like to institute a focused deterrence program. And what I mean is this: you focus on a community that is being ravaged by violence and lack of opportunity. What I would do there is you focus by bringing law enforcement to act appropriately and keep that community safe with other law enforcement agencies, the federal government, Attorney General's office, using their intelligence and also their funding, but also bringing in community leaders, religious leaders, and business people to address that at-risk youth that are at risk of dying or at risk of getting in the system, and showing their alternatives, help them get their GED or vocational training. But I don't think the current businesses in those communities give enough of opportunity, because McDonald's is not going to help you support a family. I've talked to the trades and I've talked to the unions, which are good jobs, that you can be in a union even though you have a criminal record, and bring those people in to offer opportunities of union jobs that you don't need college, that you work with your hands, at which point they're making $75 an hour. They have proper medical, they have a pension plan. I'm going to make those, or I've asked, and they're in agreement, they would go to the high schools to show you don't have to go to college. You can make money by these trades, but they have not been educated as to that. And finally, I would engage the business community to reinvest in these communities. Realtors, big business, and universities have a lot of money. And yet, they're keeping that money as opposed to reinvesting it in our youth. And bringing in opportunity to that youth. As we have opportunity, it lessens poverty, it lessens violence. So I think we need that. And with a measure of compassion, I would want to do a learn and earn program, which is in probation, rather than tell somebody you're on probation, figure it out. I have certain challenges of making those individuals clean and sober, at which point the probation is reduced, anger management and parenting classes, because people never talk about the children who are being neglected. And I would reduce their probation, get educated.
Thank you, Mr. Vega. We'll have to leave it there and move on to the next question.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, and I'm sure we will build on some of those things that you mentioned with some of our other questions. But now our next question is pretty straightforward. We'd like to ask, what endorsements are you seeking or have you received?
I've received the endorsement from the Fraternal Order of Police, the endorsement of several unions, which I believe now that I'm on the ballot, they'll come forward. So it would be the example of the Sheet Metal Workers Union, the sprinkler fitters, the elevator operators. So I've sought the support of many of the unions, because there's some issues that I want to address in terms of the unions of tax fraud that's occurring through big business. I've asked for the support of Reclaim. I'm asking for your support. And I've asked for the support of both the Latino churches and the Black churches. So I've sought the support of everyone in the city, because as a DA, I am the elected official representing the entire city. So I would seek the endorsement of everyone.
Thank you. And our next question is, do you see any opportunity for the DA's office to strengthen public confidence in police? And if so, how?
Well, it's very simple. We have to engage the community and the police and mend that divide that they're having. The DA's office has to make sure that the community is safe, make sure that we don't, as a show saying, we're going to address police misconduct and then behind the scenes do nothing. I'll use this example. This past year, 30 officers have been charged with crimes. 17 are still awaiting trial, but 12 of those cases were discharged at the preliminary hearing. So either there wasn't a proper investigation or there's incompetence in the courtroom. As to going to trial, 2 are not guilty. 3 of those cases were reduced to misdemeanors, and 1 case was given ARD, which they sealed the record. So with all those cases and people saying we're holding the police accountable, I have not seen a single officer be held accountable. As opposed to me, I have prosecuted police officers for murder and for hiding evidence. So there is a difference, but I think you need seasoned prosecutors who investigate fully and hold those individuals accountable. With that said, I believe we need to have the community be part of the training of the police department. The police from the academy and then on, they train themselves. It's an us against them mentality. If you have the DAs, defense attorneys, the judiciary, and the community leaders training and being part of that training, they could learn of what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. And suddenly they would begin that trust.
Thank you. Now we have a couple questions that are really about your campaign. Can you describe your campaign's plan to win the election with regards to staff, field operations, and fundraising?
Well, in terms, it's a traditional thing that I've been doing fundraising of talking to people. I've talked to many community leaders. I've talked to ward leaders. I'm talking to you. So it's a basic campaign that every has done, which is the issue of getting known, talking to people. Because sometimes when you think I'm a career prosecutor, there's a caricature of a person as opposed to realizing a person of color with certain that I've suffered certain injustices. Being in the system, I believe I know what works and what doesn't work. And I have ideas that you would call progressive, but also I have a strong sense of keeping our community safe. So it's the standard of I want to get to know you. I want the people to get to know me. I want to go to every neighborhood. In terms of my staff, I have many volunteers. In fact, in terms of getting on the ballot, I had almost 6,000 signatures. That was done with volunteers who went through different communities donating their time. Every day I'm getting more people, and I'm getting young people saying, how can I help? How can I make a change? So it's the basic of having a machine of volunteers who work and are committed to bringing change, and also hoping that businesses who are struggling and suffering now realize we need a change to make those businesses safe. Because I see, as a person whose family owned a bodega, the policy currently now, which people don't know, is this: when there's no ramification to shoplifting, for you to be arrested for shoplifting, you have to steal over $500 worth of product. So if you go to your CVS or Rite Aid, you see the razor blades and everything are kept under lock and key. Small mommy poppy stores in the community cannot survive, and they bring in a service to the community. Poor people don't have a car to drive to a big supermarket. It's those stores that are down the block, on the corner, that you can buy milk, toilet paper, cigarettes, canned goods. If they go under because of these thefts, the community is going to suffer. I remember all the products we sold, we had to buy and sold it at a slight profit. Those stores are needed in communities of color.
And one other question related to your campaign: who are the primary donors to your campaign?
Well, I don't understand the question of primary donors. I have people that are of means that have given me $1,000. I have people who have donated $10 to $25, and and that's very humbling, because if someone's giving $10 to $20, they don't have a lot of money. So when you talk of a primary donor, as you're aware, I don't have a person just giving me money. And if you look at my finance report, all my donations are local, as opposed to my opponent, who's getting all his donations and money from millionaires and billionaires and hedge fund managers from California and Colorado. So I think my movement is very local. So primary donors are the people of Philadelphia.
Thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair, Larry Lindsay, to follow up with some additional questions.
Good evening, Mr. Vega.
Hi.
I want to ask you about a concern that we all have since January 6th regarding the infiltration of the police department by white supremacist groups. Do you feel that that's a serious issue within the Philadelphia Police Department? And if so, what can the district attorney do about it?
Well, it's very difficult in terms of what to do about it being a local prosecutor's office. Because the issue is, and I came across this in my personal career, the times that I prosecuted police officers when I was in homicide, I remember the DAs refused to prosecute because they didn't want the stigma or the police hating them or shunning them. I stepped forward and did that. With respect to what our office can do in terms of investigating the police, I think, and this is the problem when you think of the current administration of breaking ties with the federal government and the Attorney General's office, to investigate an infiltration of a law enforcement agency, I need investigators from different sources. I need federal investigators because you have to realize locally, the police know who everybody is. So I need agents and investigators from the Attorney General's office that are unknown and members of the federal government. We have to work together to root that out. We would be the point person, but I think I need those two other agencies to really address that properly because they would have the ability to actually have agents infiltrate those organizations as opposed to me. I would have only district attorneys or local police. They can't infiltrate an organization like that. So I need to work with other agencies. So absolutely, if that's happening, it's a serious problem, has to be addressed, and we had to root out that evil.
Well, given your experience, do you think it is a serious problem within the police department?
Well, given my experience, and I've been lucky in that I've seen the officers that, and it hasn't been a racial issue, I've seen officers that have committed crimes and it has been addressed fully. But in terms of anything, a white supremacist group going in there, you have to realize I'm a person of color. They're not going to tell me I'm a white supremacist group. In fact, they're the group who hates me. So I would not know what they're doing, or if someone who's talking to me is a white supremacist in that organization. That's why I would need other people to, and agents who are law enforcement to infiltrate that. I'll use the example of accountability. Just recently last year, an officer shot his son in the back. That person only received house arrest, so how are we addressing, we have to address if there's white supremacist group within the police department. We also have to address misconduct, and that's a kind word. Actual criminal acts have to be addressed, I think, when they see that. But in terms of rooting out racism, that is a difficult thing because that is a personal thing that people could on their face look very kind and welcoming, but be a racist. So it's an investigation that has to be done. It is under wraps, and I would not be exposed to it because it's done behind my back because I'm not a white person.
Can I follow up on that? We have a related question from one of our committee people in the chat. You just mentioned prosecuting police misconduct. So I wanted to ask, this is from one of our committee members, do you believe that any police officers should be criminally prosecuted for misconduct committed during the Black Lives Matter protests last summer, for example, tear gassing on 676 and injury to a Temple student by a police officer?
Okay, the issue is absolutely if a police officer committed a crime of misconduct, they have to be prosecuted fully. They have to be held accountable, just like the protesters should be held accountable if they committed an act of violence or a crime. So absolutely. I believe the case you're talking about, I believe that that officer was arrested. I believe that matter went to court. It was discharged at the preliminary hearing with lack of evidence. I believe the DA's office once again took an appeal to rearrest that individual, and hopefully is properly investigated. But as I said with the statistics, out of what I told you, not a single officer has been found guilty, and they've reduced all the charges to misdemeanors or sealing the record. So I would hope the district attorney's office does a proper investigation or has a seasoned prosecutor who knows what he's doing. If they're going to bring the charges, actually have someone who knows what they're doing.
Mr. Vega, we'd be remiss in asking you whether or not you answered in your responses that you would consider seeking the death penalty in some cases. Can you explain to us how you think the death penalty is in the public interest?
Okay. As a district attorney, you have to realize I'm the executive branch. Okay. I don't create policy. I have to enforce the law. It's up to the legislature to do that. We see the example of marijuana use. The legislature is taking great steps and progress in legalizing certain substances. So too with the death penalty. It's up to you, the voter, to talk to your legislators to say, we don't want that on the table anymore. And you vote for them and they legislate and take that off the table. What I can do, since I'm bound by the law, is this. And since I've been a DA since Rendell on to Kelly Hodge, is this. I remember prior, the DA would make the decision. One person would make that decision whether to seek the death penalty. What I would do is have a committee, because we see on the current administration, the DA says, I will never pursue it. What I would institute is a committee of seasoned older prosecutors and defense attorneys, and allow the attorney for the accused to be part of that process, to advocate before we go to court of saying these are the issues and this is why the death penalty should not be sought. And then it's voted on by a committee in open. As we see, when you talk about the death penalty, there's a criteria of killing a police officer on duty.
Mr. Vega, I'm very sorry. We're out of time for the evening, so we're going to have to leave it there.
Okay. And thank you for having me. I appreciate the questions.
Thank you so much for
Everybody.
joining us.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you,
All right. Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you so much to Rhea and Larry for putting this together. A lot of prep work went into this, so thank you very much.